Imagine being forced to watch your fellow human beings torn apart by wild animals just for entertainment. Picture sitting in a massive stadium where the screams of dying people mixed with the cheers of bloodthirsty crowds. Welcome to ancient Rome, where entertainment meant something completely different than what we know today. The Roman Colosseum wasn't just a place for gladiator fights that Hollywood movies show us. It was the stage for some of the most shocking and cruel spectacles in human history. Today, we're diving deep into the darkest corners of Roman entertainment. We'll explore the brutal events that made even hardened Romans question if things had gone too far. From mass executions disguised as theater to animal hunts that wiped out entire species, these stories will change how you think about ancient Rome forever. Some of these events were so extreme that they shocked people who lived in an already violent time. So grab a seat, because we're about to journey back 2,000 years to witness humanity at its absolute worst. Let's start with something that sounds innocent, but was actually terrifying: the morning warm-up shows. Before the famous gladiator fights began, Romans loved to watch what they called beast hunts, or venationes. These weren't just simple animal fights, though. Imagine thousands of exotic animals shipped from across the empire just to die for entertainment. Lions, tigers, elephants, hippos, crocodiles, bears, you name it. They brought it to Rome to kill. The Romans were so obsessed with these shows that they literally drove several species to extinction in North Africa. But here's where it gets really dark. They didn't just kill animals. They forced condemned criminals to fight these beasts with no weapons and no chance of survival. Picture this: a man convicted of theft gets thrown into an arena with a hungry lion, while 50,000 people cheer for his death. The Romans called this damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. This wasn't quick either. They designed these executions to last as long as possible for maximum entertainment value. Sometimes they would tie criminals to stakes and release wild boars to slowly tear them apart. Other times they'd cover prisoners in animal skins and let hunting dogs rip them to pieces. The crowd loved every second of it. Now let's talk about the naval, fake naval battles that were absolutely insane. The Romans would actually flood the Colosseum or build temporary lakes just to stage massive ship battles. We're talking about real warships with real weapons and real people fighting to the death. Emperor Claudius once organized a naval battle on a lake that involved 19,000 men. Most of these fighters were prisoners of war or condemned criminals who knew they were probably going to die. The emperor would sit in his box wearing military dress, pretending to command the battle while thousands of people slaughtered each other below. Some of these naval battles recreated famous historical conflicts, turning real wars where people suffered and died into entertainment. The Romans loved watching these floating massacres so much that several emperors tried to outdo each other with bigger and more elaborate water spectacles. But wait, it gets worse. The Romans invented something called mythological executions that combined theater with public execution in the most twisted way possible. They would force condemned prisoners to act out famous death scenes from Greek and Roman mythology. Picture someone being forced to play Prometheus, getting chained to a rock while a real eagle tears out his liver. Or imagine playing Orpheus, getting ripped apart by real bears instead of mythological creatures. These weren't actors putting on a show. These were real people, dying horrible deaths, while the audience cheered because it looked like their favorite stories. The Romans even built elaborate stage sets and costumes to make these executions look more realistic. They hired professional storytellers to narrate the mythological background while real people suffered and died. The crowd got to enjoy their favorite myths while watching actual human beings get tortured to death. Some emperors became completely obsessed with these spectacles and started competing to create the most elaborate and cruel versions. Emperor Domitian was particularly creative with his cruelty. He once organized gladiator fights in complete darkness so the fighters couldn't see their opponents coming. He also forced women and children to fight wild animals, something that shocked even battle-hardened Romans. Domitian would sometimes change the rules in the middle of fights just to make things more unpredictable and deadly. If a gladiator was winning too easily, he'd release additional animals or armed fighters into the arena. The emperor treated human lives like pieces in a board game, moving them around for his personal entertainment. But probably the most disturbing aspect of Roman arena culture was how normal all of this became. Families would pack lunch and make a day of watching people get torn apart by animals. Children grew up thinking that watching humans die was just regular weekend fun. The Romans developed a whole vocabulary around different types of deaths and fighting styles. They had specific words for different ways people could die in the arena, like they were discussing sports statistics. Merchants sold programs listing the names and backgrounds of people who were going to be executed that day. People would bet on how long someone would last against a lion or which gladiator would win. The arena became such big business that entire industries developed around capturing animals and training fighters. Professional animal hunters would travel to the far corners of the empire looking for the most exotic and dangerous creatures. They built an entire economic system around human suffering and death. Some Roman writers started to question whether things had gone too far. The philosopher Seneca wrote about leaving gladiator games early because he couldn't stomach the cruelty. He described watching the midday executions and being horrified by how casual everyone was about human death. But these voices of conscience were pretty rare. Most Romans seemed to love the violence. The games became so popular that politicians used them to win elections and keep the population happy. Bread and circuses became the formula for controlling the masses. Give them food and violent entertainment, and they won't rebel. This created a cycle where each new leader had to put on bigger and more extreme shows to impress the crowd. What started as religious festivals and military celebrations turned into pure spectacle for its own sake. The Romans lost sight of any deeper meaning and just focused on creating more shocking and brutal displays. By the later empire, some games lasted for weeks and involved thousands of deaths. Emperor Trajan once held games that lasted 123 days and killed over 10,000 people and 11,000 animals. That's like wiping out a small town just for entertainment. The scale of death and destruction became almost impossible to imagine. Even by Roman standards, which were already pretty brutal, these later spectacles were seen as excessive. Some historians argue that this obsession with extreme violence actually weakened Roman society. Instead of focusing on military training or productive activities, Romans became addicted to watching other people fight and die. The arena culture may have contributed to the empire's eventual decline by promoting violence and cruelty as entertainment rather than practical skills. Young Romans grew up thinking that watching death was more interesting than learning useful trades or developing their minds. The constant exposure to extreme violence probably desensitized entire generations to human suffering. When your idea of fun involves watching people get eaten alive, it changes how you view other human beings. This wasn't just entertainment. It was a systematic destruction of empathy and human dignity. The Romans created a society where the worst aspects of human nature were celebrated and encouraged. So there you have it, the brutal reality behind ancient Rome's entertainment industry. These weren't just gladiator fights like we see in movies. They were systematic displays of cruelty that shocked even people who lived in violent times. The Romans turned human suffering into a business and made entire generations think that watching people die was normal fun. From beast hunts that drove animals extinct to mythological executions that combined theater with torture, these spectacles showed humanity at its absolute worst. What's really scary is how normal all of this became for ordinary Romans. Families would spend their weekends watching people get torn apart by wild animals like we go to baseball games today. The lesson here isn't just about ancient history. It's about how societies can lose their way when violence becomes entertainment. When we stop seeing other people as human beings deserving of dignity and respect, terrible things become possible. The Roman arena culture reminds us why we need to guard against cruelty and always remember that every person deserves basic human dignity. If this video opened your eyes to a side of Roman history you didn't know about, hit that like button and let me know what shocked you most in the comments below. Have you ever wondered what other dark secrets ancient civilizations were hiding? Subscribe for more deep dives into the disturbing realities behind historical myths and legends. Thanks for watching, and remember, understanding the worst parts of our past helps us build a better future.